All right, let's start the keynote session. This is the second keynote session of the conference, and it's Kristina Andersen from Stein who's giving this keynote. Stein is a center for electronic music that was created in Amsterdam in 1969 and has been like a dome for experiments and research in electronic instruments. And Kristina is working there, studying the histories and technologies of musical expression. I asked her if she was a designer because she has a background in that, but she doesn't want to use that word because she's more interested in processes, not the objects. And when designers, the connotation you get with a designer is that it's all about the object, the buttons, the look. Whereas Kristina's work is very kind of characterized by this idea of designing processes or organizing processes for musical expression. So Kristina teaches a course, Instruments and Interfaces, at Stein and Sonology. A lot of good people have come out of that course. I'm familiar with many of them. And she is a designer, practicing researcher, and is working on what's the Giant Steps EU project at the moment, coming to finish, I believe. Yeah. But yeah, welcome, Kristina.
Thanks. So what I'm going to do today is I'm not going to specifically talk music technology. I'm going to try and sort of zoom out a little bit, because while I'm based at Stein and I do a lot of work specifically on the facilitating the creation of musical things, I also do many other things, and I thought that for the purpose of today it was interesting to zoom out a little bit. So I'll be talking about architecture projects and instrument building projects and various other things. But the key to them all is a particular approach, and hopefully that'll become clear as we proceed. Now, over the last week or so, I have been finding myself thinking a lot about magical thinking. It's a sort of a place we go to when things change. And I wasn't really meaning to talk about that, but it's sort of become kind of central to a lot of the things I've been thinking about lately. Now, magical thinking it can be described as a basic misinterpretation between the causal relationships between emotions and desires, words and actions, and objects and people. So basically, it's magical thinking. There's many definitions of this, but a number of them are basically about saying, I don't know why that happened. And I'm not quite sure what the theories around this is, so I'm going to have to build my own ones. And it's possible that it's something I did. Now, that of course means that this is related to things like voodoo dolls, this idea of cursing people. I can curse you and it'll have bad effects in the real world. Hoarding. If I keep everything in my house, then I'll be safe. You never know when I will need a broken wooden spoon. And so these are all kind of misinterpretations or fanciful even interpretations of why things happen. And of course it's also the classical children's idea of, if I step on the lines between the pavement stones on my way home, something bad will happen. It's raining because I'm sad. This idea of agency, but often quite a threatening and worrying one. But this is of course directly related to pretend play. Pretend play is the kind of thing that children do. You see two children in the park, they're playing swords with sticks. They're not psychotic. They know these things are sticks. But for the purpose of the game, they're also swords. So pretend play is a really interesting purpose to look for when you're trying to imagine things, just because it's not about completely convincing yourself or other people that something might be the case. It's about holding multiple ideas at the same time. So, for the purpose of the sword play, it is a sword and it is a stick. And then when we're done, the stick goes into the branches again, and it's just a stick. And these are kind of some of the concerns that are sort of related to this idea of magical thinking. But there's also another way of thinking of it, which is this idea of incantation or cursing or casting of spells. It is because I say so. It's a kind of a cousin of magical thinking. And it's this idea that we can, maybe temporarily, maybe just imaginatively, force something into existence by saying, because I say so. And that's key to performance and art and imagination, and this is a key thing to some of the stuff I want to talk about today. This is a piece of copper that's been forcibly aged in a workshop I was doing a couple of weeks ago. And, because I say so, I made it older in one end. So, when I was younger, I came across this picture of Paul Klee, and more importantly, a quote by Walter Benjamin, where he writes about this particular picture. And he says, "This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed, but a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such a violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm insistently propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress." And this is a kind of a personal anecdote, that this picture has followed me since some time in my very early 20s. I came across this, and it's been very key to my understanding of history. And recently I had this really happy experience of reading something that kind of cracked a hole in that very hermetic vision and very sort of dystopian vision. I read some things by a wonderful, interesting theorist called Karen Barad, where she is in the process of analyzing physical phenomenon that used to be mind experiments around quantum physics. A lot of these things can now actually be executed, and one of the things that they're finding is that, I'm not going to bore you with the physics, look it up, it's very interesting, but basically it's all related to this double split screen experiment where you have these diffractive patterns emerging. This is not a photograph, this is a drawing from the 1940s. But what she's sort of coming to is this thing that whatever happens now actively reconfigures the past, which is an incredible notion, at least to me. So she says the past was never simply there to begin with, and the future is not what will unfold. There is no inherently determinate relationship between past, present, and future. It's not closed, it's open to change, it can be redeemed, productively reconfigured in an iterative unfolding of space, time, and matter. And this is kind of complicated, and if anybody feels like it, I'm happy to talk about it later. But there is something to this notion that, and you can think of it artistically as well, you can say, what we do today might not change the patterns and the traces of the past. This is not also what she's saying. It doesn't create erasure, but what it does do is changes how we look at it. We look at the past through the framework of what we do today. And this notion of agency, I think, is key to how to make works of art or works of new things at this particular point. So in a sense, we're trying to write postcards from the future or write visions for the past. And I think this idea of trying to imagine into what doesn't exist yet, but also trying to reconfigure what has already occurred is sort of key to it. And of course you have these notions of things like Whitehead, who says a traveler who's lost his way should not ask, where am I? What he really wants to know is, where are the other places? And that's kind of a little bit how I feel this week. Where are the other places? The video is from a cloud chamber. Does anybody here knows what this is? I will explain it. The cloud chamber was originally created to investigate mythological phenomena. What it is a little black box with a mirror on the bottom. They have super chilled alcohol in there, like a fog is in there. And what happens is that certain types of radioactive radiation makes these little steam trails. And you see that little tower up there in the corner? That's an isotope. Somebody's put an isotope in there, and there's little steam trails coming off it. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting are those big fat things that are happening in the rest of the box. That is background radiation. That's radiation from space. The box is not built to look at background radiation. They only really realized it was there after they built the box. They built the box to look at the little thing. And I think that there is a parallel here to performance, to science, to research, to experiments. We build boxes. We go to great care to build things so that we can pay attention to a thing we think we need to pay attention to. But as we're paying attention, we occasionally find other things that are bigger and potentially more interesting. And it's a good sort of metaphor for that. So a lot of my work is sort of focused around this question of how can we practice the things we don't know yet? Is there a way we can act and talk about or act around these things that we haven't imagined yet? And this is sort of key to the thinking about making new technologies, but also to making new things or making new experiences. And of course, this is happening in a context where every single damn thing that's being made right now has CPU in it. Your washing machine has CPU. Your car has loads of CPU. Possibly your coffee machine has CPU, I'd imagine. My watch has CPU. Computer is no longer a descriptive word of anything. It has actually disappeared. We were always saying that everybody said the computer was going to disappear, and now it's happened. So instead we have this kind of weird invisible thing. And I was doing a project on nanotechnology, and we were finding it very difficult to collaborate with the nanotechnology scientists. And then we realized we didn't have to, because nobody knows what it is. So you can just say it has nanotechnology, and people will go, oh. So we did a whole project that I'm not going to talk much about today, but about where we just basically proposed that we had nanotechnology and did a whole project, and we had absolutely none. The whole thing was made entirely out of other things. And this is a key to the other sort of main sort of strategy that I make use of in my work. Over the years, whenever I try to make things that address technology, I'm finding that it is helpful to use less and less actual technology in the imagination of technology, because we get all fascinated by the things that are right there. So, the Arduino wants to do a certain kind of thing. The Wii controller wants to do a certain kind of thing. It's like these things have gravitational forces. They want us to solve certain problems. They want that thing to, they literally want to blink and tell us how strong the Wi-Fi is. And if you don't particularly necessarily think this is what you need to do, I'm in the process of narrowing down the kind of raw material that I use as material for working with, simply because I'm finding that the more I pare it down, the better the ideas get, the less we're fulfilling technological notions that were already built into the tools that we're using. In a similar way, Post-it notes will always ever generate a large amount of badly spelled words in pasted colors that are stuck ineffectively to each other, and you're left with this thing. And nobody ever really actually knows what to do with the thing. All it is, it's words. And you kind of go, damn, why did I do that? And I have completely banned Post-it notes. Because what is the point? Do you really want words stuck not very well to each other? Anyway, that's my thing. Anyway, so basically we're trying to get to the point where we're making objects as a method for both thinking about and imagining ideas. So we want to tease out sort of new and unexpected things, but from the everyday. So what it is sort of centered around is objects and experiences. And I'm going to super quickly race you through a bunch of things. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to basically find little examples in four different projects. One of them is from something called the Festival of the Imagination. It's a performative workshop conducted in a department store. And the second one is an architectural participatory project done with secondary school aged children. Third one is Giant Steps. It's a large, complicated, well-funded EU project that's about to end, so we're at the tail end of that. And the last one is a modified cello that you're going to hear played tonight. So Dan is not here, Dan Gibson, who's my collaborator on this project, but we agreed that I could talk about it, and you will hear it played later. So the key thing to all of this stuff is this quote from Catherine Valente, which comes from a children's book, be warned. She says, first you build the machine, then it tells you what it's for. A machine is only a kind of magic for attracting use. This is why we say that things are useful, because they're full of all the use that shows them to perform itself. And that's a little how I consider this idea of making prototypes or maquettes. So we make things and then we see what kind of use is attracted to them as a way of thinking about what that use might be. All right, Festival of the Imagination. This was conducted in Birmingham at the Selfridges department store. It was a really, really, really great little commission. They built a little hut in between the very expensive handbags and the very expensive shoes. And in that hut, lots of people were doing workshops, and I was one of the workshops there. And what we did was I got them to give me packaging from the products already on sale in the store. And the people doing the workshop were just random shoppers coming into the hut going, what's going on here? And what we'd do is, as people would come in, I'd have a conversation about, if you could have anything at all, like really anything at all, what would it be? And can we build it? Can we build it out of the material we have here? And keeping in mind we had bubble wrap and coat hangers and you know, this kind of stuff. And the work like that is really centered to this idea of like who gets to have the vision. I did not say technology. I was using the word magic because it is broader than what civilians would think of as technology. So I'm saying, if you could have any ability or skill or magical power, what would it be? And I'm going to show a little bit of examples of it. This is a boy. He came in and he said, what I really want to do is, he's about 5, 6, and I want to be able to do this. And then there's pizza. You know, it's just a fair enough thing. And I wrote serious on his glove because, so what I do in that situation is we sit down, we have a very serious conversation about this. Because of course, if you're going to be able to do this and there's pizza, there's all kinds of unanswered design questions. Like, you have a Midas touch problem, for starters. There's going to be times in the shower where you're reaching for the shampoo and accidentally there's pizza, and it's just not a good outcome, you know? This is going to be like a problem, right? So we had long conversations, and he sat down and solved it, and I was very curious about it, and because I wanted to know what he was going to do about the Midas touch problem. And he ended up building a glove, and the glove protects him from his pizza making abilities. So the ability is in him, and the glove protects him from what he can do. And I thought that from a design point of view is super, super interesting, because I was thinking he was going to go the other way. He was going to make a glove that makes pizza. And that would have been an object and a tool. But instead he made a tool to protect him from his own skills. And, you know, it's not a design proposal, but it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the boy in the back of that picture. It's a terrible picture. He comes in with his 2 siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. And he is the middle child. He's super bullied. He's about 14, I would guess. And I didn't even talk to him because his siblings were taking up all the oxygen in the room and getting him to do stuff for him. And then as he leaves, he comes over and talk to me at the end, and he goes, and I go, so what did you build? And he pulls this thing out of his pocket, and it's made out of the shoulder part of a coat hanger, and has a button on it. And I say, okay, so what is this? And he says, this is an anywhere but here button. And if you guys remember being 14, that's just like the best description I ever heard of what it feels like to be 14. Anywhere but here, really. Not being fuzzy, just get me out of here. And again, this idea that we can think about, these are of course not technologies as such, but what they are is their desires, their visions of what you might want to be able to do. And then you can backtrack those to some extent into something, well, the mobile phone to some extent could be considered an anywhere but here machine, in a sense. Or it's often used like that. Anyway, so the other thing I wanted to pick up on is Go Your Own Way, which is an architectural project. We were asked by the Dutch funding agencies to come up with ideas of how to let children in secondary school survive creatively. I mean, this is literally how it was put. How do we let these kids who are creative, when they come into secondary school, survive as artists and creative people, but to, for those 6 years until they graduate, so that they can become artists and creative people at the end of it, without needing another 6 years to unlearn all the crap from secondary school, And so basically what we did was we did participatory stuff. So we took them through a series of workshops where we are playing with material and scale and timing. So the very first thing we do is we give them candy and very sharp knives. And importantly, very little scale figures in 1 to 100. So we walk into a room full of, say, 14 to 16-year-olds, and we give them these materials and we say, build a space that is missing at school. It is very hard to build anything out of candy at scale. It is the reason we do this is it crosses a couple of boundaries at once. You know, you're not supposed to have candy and sharp knives at school to begin with, and probably it's worse when you have them together. And also, I just asked them an impossible question. I asked them to come up with an object that would make things better. And of course, nothing is going to make anything better. Not from that point of view. So you ask an impossible question, you give them impossible materials, and then you put them under time pressure. And then sometimes it works. And they make these quite amazing things. And also, it's an equalizer in the sense that it doesn't matter how good you are with your hands. This is hard for everybody. It's sticky, it smells, it's weird. And we do this very, very quickly, and then we immediately move them on. We give them cardboard, little matchboxes and little figures in 1 to 50. And we ask them to keep building. Now, of course, with the candy, you're carving out of a mass quite difficultly. So from an architectural, sculptural point of view, you're likely to make a certain kind of thing. With the matchbox, you're deconstructing a structure that's already there. So you're building different kinds of things. And then we move them straight onto 1-to-1. And we go straight onto building in cardboard these things that they've imagined. And immediately they're into this 1-to-1 thing. And this is all done in half a day. And the point of doing this is that we're trying to do a participatory process where we're not telling them they have to be the architect. We're telling them that they have this impossible thing they have to solve, but we're forcing them through 3 scales and 3 strategies. And that somehow allows them to feel freer and to participate on equal sizes, because none of these 3 exercises are easy. We would all struggle to do this. You know, nobody's any better at this than anybody else. And then what we do is we take them apart and we make these architectural objects. This is an object, this is a concentration space for one that folds together. We haven't actually built this one yet. I am tentatively calling it the death trap. Because my feeling is you kick it, it'll do this. So we'll see. We'll have to check that before we put it in stuff. But this one has been built. This is a foldable staircase that allow people to have extra seating anywhere in the school where you want to just hang out. Because everybody knows the best place to sit is a staircase. And this is a box for stuff. So these are the kind of things, but again, it's the same sort of strategy, using very deliberate strategies around material, time, scale, and the kind of questions you ask, and being preposterously big, asking big questions, and then providing essentially terrible working conditions. Sometimes allow things to come out which are more interesting. The Giant Steps project is a big collaboration. We're working with University in Barcelona, University in Linz, Native Instruments in Berlin, Reactable in Barcelona again, STIME in Amsterdam, and Red Bull Music Academy. How many of you people know the Red Bull Music Academy? Ah, quite a few. I've put just for those of you who don't know what the Red Bull Music Academy is, this is what it's like.
It is important not just to dance, to listen, to message.
You get the general idea. Red Bull Music Academy is a great partner to work with, because I'm from STIME and we're, like all of you guys would fit straight in, and it's very earnest and experimental and fuzzy and all those things, which are great. But it's really, really nice to have a project where these are the people we're working with. They are mainstream dance music producers. That's what they want to do. They're making music. This is great. This is what they do. And we're working directly with them. We're not making interfaces that are good for children. We're not being educational. We're working to make digital interfaces for professional, creative work made by these people. And of course, the kind of things that they're needing to do is find files, match things, have inspiration, cut out the boring parts of a production, all of these kind of things that are very similar to the kind of stuff that we sit and do in front of whatever interfaces we're working with. But getting the chance to work with professionals is a really big opportunity because it allows us to, it doesn't have to be easy, it just has to be good. So, of course, because I'm involved, there has to be a twist, right? So, of course, we're making real prototypes integrated into complex interfaces that are made by native instruments and reactables. We're, of course, doing that. We're making software prototypes, we're writing algorithms. I say we, and when I say we, I mean they. But then we're making, one of the thing that I'm doing, my job in this is to make sure that we have a solid understanding of what the artistic desire of this group of people is. And that brings me right back to the same question that I'm asking the school children in Holland. So we're making non-functional prototypes, of course, because we haven't built it yet. And basically it works through this notion that is, you'll recognize the sort of main strategy by now. If you get a bunch of musicians around a table and you first have to have them explain what their music is and what their problems with their current interfaces is, we did not want a long list of complaints or interface little bits that don't work. Or my problem is that this thing wasn't synced with this thing. Now those are valid problems, but it wasn't the point of what we were doing. So what we basically do is, again, we take them through this very fast-paced making things. So I give them impossible materials. I give them a very small piece of paper and I give them charcoal and I say, draw the sound you want to make. Because you can't do that. But you also can't not do that. So, you do that and you spend 30 seconds making that decision. And then we move straight on and we have terrible materials. Cardboard. For this particular round, we only chose things that you could buy in HEMA. Those of you who've been in Holland will know what that means. This is essentially paper cups, paper plates, forks, knives, elastic bands, pins, this kind of stuff. And so we basically say, immediately after you made this little drawing, you say, make the machine that makes that sound. But here's a bunch of really terrible materials. And we're not talking about it. We're not talking about what it does. And it is impossible, obviously. But it's also not very hard to begin, which is an interesting situation to be in. So everybody just gets going and builds stuff. And it's a kind of a sort of a sewing bee kind of feeling. Everybody's going, oh, can I have the scissors? And if you hold, can you hold here while I glue this thing? And so they're building stuff. And then at the end, and that's when it gets serious all immediately again. I get them to stand up and I get them to say, show me what you built and tell me how it works. And this is what you get. So this girl, this is a live interface for creating micro-timing of live music. So basically your event horizon is horizontal through the cups. And you can see the zigzag lines coming up there. That's music happening. And what she's doing is that all her musical events are streaming upwards. And here's now, right? And what she's doing with the cups is she's micro-timing all the musical events as they come through for live performance. That's pretty good for... And I don't think we would have gotten there in an hour if we'd had to take the long way around. So basically what we're doing is that what you want comes true somehow. And sometimes it helps by not asking explicitly, because once I put you on the spot and you have this thing, you don't have nothing. And also it exists. So you are forced in a live improv way to essentially improv around the thing you built. And then it's actually much easier to have a strong position. This is a search engine, obviously. In the box are objects of different textures and weight. And he's using his sense of touch to find things. Now this is directly related to some of the ways we're dealing with search in the project. There's a large so-called MIR component to the project. And one of the things that increasingly is where we're at is that at this point we're overwhelmingly searching for samples through language, metadata and language and whatever the hell you call that file. But these are people, so they probably call the file final B3, really this one, Paris. Because that's what we all do, right? And not in the beginning, but at the end. When you go final, no really. And then you have several folders that's called the same thing. One is on a desktop and the other one is in samples, and you're not I don't need to tell you this. So language is not necessarily a super great way of dealing with samples, simply because, well, it just isn't. And there's very little you can do about it. So it makes much more sense to look inside the actual file, because sound is a tricky thing to search for, simply because it has a one-to-one relationship. You can't browse it like you can browse images. You could preview a folder full of images and tiny little and go through and going, I can roughly find the picture of the blue sky if it's a pile of other things, but you can't do that with sound. You have to open the file and listen to it. So finding sound is an ongoing issue. This is an interface for music too. Whatever she does with her hand down there changes all of her options. They cascade through the paper plates. This is an adaptive intelligent system for creating music. So these are just 3 examples of things coming out of just one session we did last year. And then what we then do is, through all of this, is basically I get to sit down and record interviews with these guys. And we talk about things, but we also, we build these objects. I hand them other people's objects. I'm going to hand this guy, I have a little bag here of little cardboard things. And I'm about to hand him this thing of saying, this is how this thing works. How would you use that? And again, it's a preposterous idea, because of course it's a cardboard box and it does exactly nothing. But by making it physical, it's an easier proposal. It's easier to understand what it might do. Now, the last thing I'm going to show examples from is a modified cello you're going to see played tonight. It's a collaboration with Dan Gibson. Very long dreadlocks. Go find him, he's a great guy. And basically, again, I asked him to draw the sound he wanted to make, but I gave him a speed marker and asked him to draw on his hand, which is even more evil. Also, again, commitment. It's a commitment. It's a start commitment. This is something that you could do a lot in theater as well. Blast theory calls it the red dot. You have to have a red dot experience within minutes of getting people engaged in something, because then they kind of can't back out. They have done an act of commitment. You just drawn on your hand. That's pretty committed, actually. And it kind of doesn't matter what you drew. This is a really good drawing. So what we did was he wanted to modify a cello. He came to me and he had a cello, and he was using granular synthesis to modify the live cello sound. And the cello in question was a MIDI cello. This is important. It wasn't very, very expensive, i.e. we could do stuff. When people come with a real cello, it's always a little limited, because you're working with something that is representing a large value, but is also, you're messing with the acoustics, which is complicated. A MIDI cello is easier to deal with because you're not so dependent on acoustics either. So we started talking about what is the nature of the cello, what makes a cello a cello, how do we deal with this their 2 hands are doing massively different things. And also we made cellos out of tin cans and metal wire and played them and tried to think about balance and ergonomics and stability. The cello, of course, has a real stability thing. It won't stand up on its own. So you have to hold it. It has, you can't just let go and be over here on the computer. Unless you have thought this through in some way. But also it has it's a kind of instrument that's very intimate. It's, you're embracing it literally. And of course there's a large element of, in order to play it in the first place, you have to reach a certain level of virtuosity and skill. And of course synthesis, like this idea of modifying sound is something you have to arrive at an understanding of as well in order to do something about it. And we started building models of how we might imagine what it is the computer does. This is a filter. And And we were just, there's an element of larking about here. And the larking about allows us to be flexible and funny, and some of the things are deeply serious, and some of them are just what would happen if we did it like that. And then we started doing this very, very simple things. We started sticking things onto the cello. We started placing things, and using it as a platform onto which we could do things. And you can tell it's done in with very little respect for the cello, I must say. And we kept placing things and saying, what would happen if here there was something? And then, so we would place things on the cello, and then Dan would play it. And then we would add extra strings, we would take strings off it, we would do all kinds of very naughty things to the poor thing. But every time we'd done a modification, he would sit down and play and go, a little bit further down, and things would be moved further down or further up before we even knew what it did or what its function was. So this idea of using it as a sculptural process, and in a way every single element of the cello, including the new elements, had to fight for their own existence. It was not a given that there would be the same amount of strings on there. They were nothing was safe. And so in a sense, what we were doing was we were essentially taking the cello and its desired new functionality and exploding it and addressing each one of them separately. And then every time Dan plugged it all back in together again and started playing, it came together as one object. So it is constantly tested through this thing of, is it still a thing? Does it still have some sort of object integrity to it? So this idea of playing modifications and then mapping it. And of course, very quickly what we ended up doing was to stick a plastic box on the back of it with a Arduino that acts as an interface so that we can immediately start putting on pods that actually do things. The computer's still there, but now it's under the chair. So it still does the processing at this point. But we were starting to say, okay, all right, if we want the control of the computational aspect of this to happen on the cello, where should it happen? Because it has to function within what it is the cello does in itself. So basically, it had if you're holding a bow in this hand, that you can't do other things with it. You don't want to put it down because you're using it. So lots of things would happen, like these dials that are sitting quite far down on the cello, and they're bowable. You can use the bow to turn them, for example. So this is one way of dealing with that hand. And other things like the sliders, let's see if there's a good picture. The sliders are sitting along the neck, which means that he's not having to move his hand somewhere entirely different in the middle of a musical action. So trying to create, there's a computational action and there's a computational modification action and there's a sound producing action, and trying to have these two merge through the actual playing. So this is a little bit the process that we took in this. And of course you're going to see him play tonight. And I believe he's going to demo it tomorrow morning. So you can actually have a look at the details. And this is an ongoing thing. And also, this is one of the things that is maybe sort of very key to the kind of things we do at Stein. And the idea is that there is always an artist. We don't build instruments that don't have musicians attached to them, because someone has to love it. Even if it's just one person, someone has to love it. The world is full of interactive new musical instruments that are not being played, that are barely being demoed. And it's a waste of energy and time to make those, unless it happens to be crucial to the completion of your PhD. But from a musical point of view and our instrument building point of view, you need to, in order for something to become an instrument, building it is almost the least of it. It is the learning to play it, the touring with it, the realizing after 3 months that this particular slider just is not worth it or needs to be remapped or it fell off. And I didn't love it enough to put it back on again. And the realization that Dan is going through right now, that he's still traveling with a damn cello, which means he needs to buy an extra seat on the airplane, which means that he will tour much less. So he's now looking at making smaller instruments. But this process of learning to live with an instrument is really key to this kind of process, because we're particularly at Stein, we're not engaged in an intellectual development of technology here. We're just trying to make instruments, and we will use whatever technology is available to reach an artistic goal. But with a bit of luck, you will be able to see some of the same strategies coming through. So, in a sense, what we're trying to do is or what I'm trying to do in all of these projects, both the sort of instrument building ones and the other ones that are addressing civilians or particular groups of people, it's this idea of, essentially, we're making souvenirs from the future. This idea that there are objects. Souvenirs are great because they're objects of desire. They sort of assist us in a souvenir from that trip to Paris. If somebody was going to give you their souvenir from their trip to Paris that you didn't go on, you'd be like, I don't need that. But the same actual metal object that you bought on that trip where these things happened is suddenly imbued with meaning. It provides a connection into the past to that event that happened. And I think in some ways one of the things that we're trying to do is to create objects that might create links into the future where a particular idea or desire or fear or a dystopic vision might reside. And that is where the power comes from. And at the same time, of course, we're trying to always, this is all clearly centered around trying to have a situation where language is not the only way we gather knowledge. We can have language. Language is really great for so many things. But it's kind of nice to try and do some of the cognitive work before you put language on there. And of course, who's making this and who are they making it for? This is always going to be super central to some of these things. So, particularly when you look at art, science stuff, where people are trying to make academic work around art or art around academic work, this crossover that is happening so much now. It has to be constantly asked, how are you making this data? Are the participants just there so that you can extract this data from them, or are they active creators of their own data? And I think this is something we have to address again and again, the ethics of working with people. I cannot say it strong enough. There's so many ethical concerns around all of this stuff, and scientific concerns. But the thing that I'm really concerned with is how to make sure that when you're working with people, you do so with respect and with a feeling of a peer-like feeling, where they're aware of what you're doing, and they are creating these objects themselves and have authorship and ownership of that. And in that sense, can be thought of as visionaries. So you're not the visionary. It's not you. It's maybe they get to be the visionary. You're just assisting, really, taking notes. So practice it, and these are some of the concerns that are sort of coming through this. We're trying to practice at the unknown. We're trying to create things that are out of time and reason. They don't need to be here yet. We're not entirely sure what they do. This is an example of an instrument created in one of these workshops. I mean, it's clearly doing something, but we just don't know what it is yet. And it's sort of a model for the unknown. But it's a strong statement, even if we don't know what it's saying yet. And then, of course, agency. We get to assert ourselves back into the world. Because it's really, really easy to go, well, I don't know. And particularly when it comes to trying to imagine things, most people who sit around and try to imagine new things are spending the majority of the time where they're supposed to be doing that, going, or you have ideas and you go, oh no, it's been done, oh that's stupid, it's never going to work, And instead of being caught in this inner monologue with yourself, just actually make things and walk away from most of them. They're temporary. They allow us agency temporarily. This is from a workshop I was doing, and it's sort of associated with this quote from this podcast called This American Life, where they made a podcast about superheroes, and they had this wonderful quote where they say, when we were weak, we wanted to be strong, and when we were very weak, we wanted to be very strong. And I just love that as a quote. This idea of feeling disempowered may actually encourage us to imagine things that wield enormous power. And of course, the things that we make are sort of like, I love this, it's a continuity error. And so if we make something crazy out of cardboard and put it on the table, it should not be here yet. We don't even know what it does. But just like a ballpoint pen left on the table of Marie Antoinette's nightstand, now it's here, we're going to have to address it, Ballpoint pens, who knew? And it allows us to temporarily sort of encourage the idea or live with the idea temporarily. As soon as we're done with thinking it through, it turns into trash again. But these things are essentially continuity errors. They're not supposed to be here. They're not supposed to be here in this context. And I'm sort of kind of coming towards where I'm sort of want to end this. And I think that I found this quote from the same piece of children's book that I quoted earlier about the machines being useful. And it's a long quote, you're going to have to bear with me. The main character has just met this woman who runs a bathhouse where you can launder your wishes. And she says, wishes of one's old life wither and shrivel like old leaves if they're not replaced by new wishes when the world changes. And the world always changes. Wishes get slimy and their colors fade. And soon they're just mud like all the rest of the mud, and not wishes at all but regrets. The trouble is not everyone can tell when they ought to launder their wishes. Even when one finds oneself in fairyland and not at home at all, it is not always so easy to remember to catch the world and its changing and change with it. It's super dramatic and highly wrought, but I love this quote, and it sort of carries me through this particular week. And it echoes, we're back to the cloud chamber, and it echoes something that Judith Butler said ages ago, that we're required to risk ourselves at the moments of unknowingness, when what forms us diverges from what lies before us, when our willingness to become undone in relations to others constitutes our chance of becoming human. But so we get to change ourselves in response to what happens in the world. But I want to take it a little further into this notion from Karen Barat, where she's essentially suggesting that we may actually not just change the future, but maybe change our position in this continuum between the past and the future. And we might have the agency to do this by imagining things that we can push out there. And I'm just going to end with this video of the Greimarker investigating a microphone, because I always do, and you'll see. Does anybody know this piece? This is called Interna. It's a part of a piece where he was very interested in looking at what is a microphone, what does it do? This is the sound of a microphone dying. This piece is not being performed very often. It's really hard to fundraise, for obvious reasons. And essentially what it does is that it addresses the material. It addresses the technological material. And, it's the same sort of, I like to think of it as a sort of a part of the same move that we're engaged in here. That's it.
We have 10 minutes for questions, comments.
I wonder how you place you mentioned the age of history at the beginning, and it kind of seems like quite a scary quote.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, how do you place that back into?
I put it in I put it in this morning. the angel of history is literally, for me it's a personal thing. I came across this quote as a 21-year-old, and I was like, it just sort of sat with me for years, and the way I see it, it's not very well developed, because I'm sort of, it's the kind of thing that I'm chewing on right now. And what it actually is looking, I think that I don't know you guys, but this week in particular, you look at the world and you go, okay, kinda, and that's on a good moment. And the rest of the time, I don't know, you're just huddled in a corner, right? And I think we have to address the world. It's easy for the arts to temporarily just say, well, I'm doing this thing over here, I'm only engaged with my little thing. And I think that at least for me, even if I can build a working strategy for how to even think about history, then it makes it easier for me, not necessarily to make the things I'm trying to make, but just to literally get out of bed in the morning. I mean, it's that simple. And for me, the key thing was really this meeting of the Karen Barat notion that maybe the angel of history is not quite being blown into the future quite like that. There is maybe a possibility, maybe this absolute that the angel of history represents, maybe we can crack a little crack in that. Because it is a hermetic vision, and it's written at a dramatic time. It's a heavy one, and it's I don't know. For me, it's something I'm not quite done with processing, but it's sort of a follower. I don't know. One of the things that happens, I don't know if any of you guys are academics to begin with, or are more artists doing academic things, but one of the things that happens when I did art school. I never went to the university until later. And that means that the way I deal with theory is I deal with it almost like a collector. You have a tendency of having quotes that follow you along. And to say that we deal with them in an academic manner would be not quite truthful. We do it when we have to, but the truth is we use them as incantations and curses and things we stick on the fridge. And I don't know, or at least I do. These pieces of text that follow me, and it's not all of them. Sometimes you have a particular quote that follows you, and it takes you 10 years to go, that's what they meant, and you change your mind about it. I mean, I treat text very similar to the way I would treat other things, I guess. And I guess that quote is just one of the things that follow me. And I decided this morning to throw it in.
I want to ask you about the Giant Steps project, like if you can evaluate the whole approach with this kind of like imagined interfaces, and what actually happened in the end.
Yeah, that's a good question, because we're at the end. There's 4 months left of funding. So basically, some things. So of course, when you ask open-ended questions like that, some of the things people ask for are going to be like, yeah, that would be nice, but we're not there. So what's happened is that some things have gone straight into stuff that are literally going to be packed into cardboard boxes within the next year or so. So that's also the really great thing about working with a major producer of musical equipment. The amount of stuff that actually, I mean, you wouldn't recognize it unless you know. But there's a little thing in that iPad app under the hood that dictates with how the results of a particular algorithm is handled in the interface. That is a direct outcome of me building cardboard stuff. I mean, I know that. Nobody else would know that, but of course, this is the reality of working with. Yeah, of course. I mean, this is the reality. This is what's special about the Giant Steps project, is that we're working in a sort of a business environment almost. That there are lots of sort of lofty artistic goals. And then there is some stuff that actually has to pass through a project manager, and there was all these people involved. It's a Native Instruments have 600 employees in Berlin. I mean, they can't just build stuff because we think it would be funny. So that means that the reality of that, if you've ever been working in hardware production, is only your ideas will emerge into real things in an almost atomic form. something about the way a particular thing turns will come from. But the other thing is outcome of it. So in order to honor what we're finding, we are right now writing all these papers where we are talking about the main outcomes that we're talking about is microtiming. We won't be able to do microtiming within the frame of the project, but we published the idea of microtiming at Izmir. We have ideas around strangeness that I haven't actually talked about. Computational strangeness. There is a move in computer science that, for example, with information retrieval, that you want to have the perfect match. You know, you put something into Google and you want to hit "I'm feeling lucky" and have the perfect match. Now, in the arts and creative work, you don't want the perfect match. If I'm going to put a sample into some kind of sample search engine, I don't want it to return me the same sample. I've got that sample, say. I put it into the engine because I want something that's a bit like that, but not quite. So one of the things that we published this as an idea, but we haven't built it. But one of the things that we're doing is we're proposing saying the same algorithm that will return a perfect match to a sample. Instead of returning the best result, which would be the computer science way, what we're saying is we're finding ways of clustering the results, you know, because a lot of them are going to be the same. And then, if you can imagine, here's metaphorically your Google research page, you know, with the best choice up here. Imagine if I take that result line and I squeeze it and I bend it around a dial. And then I can say, I want this sample, but I want it 14% different. Along whatever axis you've got. And of course, all the work lies in the clustering of stuff. But this idea of creating almost like a guitar pedal for search results. So you could almost imagine you're in the middle of something and you whack up the difference, right? Sort of. Yeah. Right. So, for example, something like this. We haven't built that, but we've written about it. And you know, stuff like that is interesting because we get to write papers where half the paper is music information retrieval and the sort of fairly technological knowledge, and then the other half of it is Slavsky. I forget who it was who quoted Slavsky earlier. There you go. We're quoting Slavsky, and there's something really, really awesome about having the references in the back of your paper span 100 years. It's a nice feeling. So, because of course it's a straight up artistic practice, we are making the search results strange.
And I was curious about the search by the tactile interface.
That's what that is related to.
That's it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah, so when you say you publish it, let's say you go to, is there a website for Giant Steps, and they're going to be results of Giant Steps are these publications, blah, 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 blah. And is that ongoing? Has it existed yet, or will it exist?
The website is there. The quirkiness of making EU design is that this is the strangest thing in the world. The European Union gives you money to do research, but they require you to host your own website. And then they cut your funding at the end of the project. And there's no mechanism for buying endless hosting of that website. It's the strangest thing. Why don't they host? Anyway, but yes, we are hosting the website. We found a place to host that in one of the universities, so it'll exist over time. But also we are publishing in academic context, so everything will be in the ACM library.
Right, and what about in the business context?
Business context, as you would probably all know, that's never published.
So
because
you're not going to have that as a result on Giant Step?
Oh, absolutely, we will, but only after the fact. So all the stuff that is likely to be contenders for actual features they're all classified for obvious reasons. You know, this is a competitive field.
No. But what I'm saying is, let's say you made a new controller. You couldn't say something like, "We made a new controller for."
Yeah, we could.
Such and such.
So the keyboard, there's a keyboard that came out of Native Instruments about a year ago. There is parts of the predictive settings and that are coming from the Giant Steps project, particularly related to some of the algorithms. There is a iPhone app that has a lot of input from the Giant Steps project, and there's a new version of Machina due in about 6 months.
Right, so you do say something like leave me on that.
Mhm.
That's it.
Yeah.
Alright.
And of course, there's an entirely new reactable that runs on the iPad with physical objects. Look it up; it's awesome.
Any final questions? Brilliant. So we have a performance at 5 o'clock, I think, in APA, in the auditorium there. And after that, we head up into Cape, where there is a nice performance venue where we will get Indian food.
How do we do that?
We just take the bus.
What do you have instructions or anything on this?
I've prepared
yeah.
a little map with the route of the bus.
She's got a map.
I've prepared a little map, and there are about 40 maps in the reception of Akka if you want to get a map and take the bus with you.
Yes.
Otherwise, I think there's probably going to be a group of people going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You won't get lost. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kristina.